adding and subtracting negative numbers. Calculate number 1, 6 minus 4. Now we know the answer is 2. But let's examine more carefully to see if we can find a pattern or rule we can apply to other examples of this type. Now if you have a look at this more carefully, treat this 6 as positive 6, because it is positive there, so that's 6 positives. Subtracting 4, and treat the subtraction as negative, so we have 4 negatives. So we've got 6 positives and 4 negatives. We examine the number which has the largest size, which is 6. We look at its sign, and because it's positive in this case, we know the final result must be positive. And then what we simply do is take the difference between the two numbers. Now let's apply this idea to the next example. We have 3 minus 8. Treat this as 3 positives and 8 negatives. 8 is a larger number than 3. There's a negative in front of the 8, so the result must be negative. And we take the difference between the two numbers. 8 minus 3 is 5. Now again, we apply the same idea to number 3. Treat this as 9 negatives and 5 positives. Clearly 9 as a larger number than 5. There's a negative in front of the 9, so the sign of the result must be negative. By how much? 9 minus 5 is 4. Now the next one, we have negative 6 minus 2. Now treat this as 6 negatives, and we're actually adding another 2 negatives. So clearly the sign must be negative, and just simply add the two numbers. 6 and 2 is 8. Let's follow the same idea with the next one. Now we've got 9 negatives here, plus 3 negatives. Now I can rewrite this as negative 9, take away 3. It's exactly the same thing. So 9 negatives and 3 negatives will give a total result of negative 12. So keep the sign, which is negative, and add the two numbers 9 and 3. Now the next one, what we're doing here, we've got 7. Now we're subtracting a negative. Every time you subtract a negative, always gives a positive. So that means 7 plus 2. And of course, that is 9. I'll say it again. Every time you subtract a negative, the two negatives become positive. Now we're going to follow the same idea with the next one. We've got negative 8. We're now subtracting a negative 5, so that becomes plus 5. Now we follow the same idea, same rule as we did earlier. We've got 8 negatives and 5 positives. Clearly the sign in front of the 8, which is the larger number, is negative, so the result is negative. Take the difference between these numbers, and it is 3. Answer, negative 3. Now let's have a closer look at the explanation why, when you subtract a negative, you get a positive. Let's treat this number line here as a temperature scale. Now we're going to treat that when we add a number, it's just like adding heat, and we move to the right. When we subtract a number, it's just like adding cold, and we move to the left. So for example, if I'm on 3 degrees here, and I add 2 degrees of heat, of course, I'm now on 5 degrees. If I'm on 3 degrees and I subtract 2 degrees, in other words, I add coldness of 2 degrees. So I'm on 3 and I subtract 2, so I go to the left, and then I'm on 1 degree. Now let's say if I'm on 5 degrees And what I do, I subtract coldness. Now, of course, when you subtract coldness, so I go subtract coldness of, say, -2. Now, of course, when you subtract coldness of -2, when you subtract cold, you'll feel hotter. So therefore, what happens, you're 5 degrees, and you'll get hotter by 2 degrees. So the answer is 7. So the -2 becomes +2. So 5 plus 2 becomes 7. And that explains why when you subtract, a negative always becomes a plus. Now let's have a look at the rule here. So we're adding and subtracting negative numbers. Let's have a look at case 1, which we did. When there is a minus in front of one number only, thus the other number is positive, of course, we keep the sign of the number with the larger size, then take the difference of the numbers. For example, you can see here there's a positive in front of the 8, negative in front of the 6. The sign of the numbers are different. 8 is bigger than 6 by 2. And of course, it's positive in front of the 8. The final result must be positive. Here we have a positive in front of the 4, negative in front of the 10. 10 is larger than 4, negative in front of the 10. So we keep the sign of the larger number and take the difference between the two. 10 minus 4 is 6. Again, here you can see that 8 positives and 3 negatives. You see the two signs are different. A negative and then a positive there. 8 is bigger than 3, so the result is positive. Take the difference between the numbers 8 and 3, we get 5. And here, same idea here again. 9 and 6. 9 is bigger than 6. It's negative in front of the 9, so the final result must be negative. Take the difference between the numbers. 9 minus 6 is 3. Now let's have a look at case 2, where we have a minus in front of both numbers. You can see there -4 minus 5, or -4 minus 5. It's the same thing. You can see we keep the sign, which is negative, and then simply add the two numbers together. Same thing here again. We have 11 negatives and 6 negatives. Your final result must be negative. And then add the 11 and the 6, we get -17. Now, here, same thing again. -4 plus -5. This is the same thing as -4 take away 5. Keep the sign, which is just negative, and add the two numbers together. 4 and 5 is 9. And then case 3, where there are two minuses in front of the second number. The two minuses become a plus, and the operation becomes an addition. In other words, you're subtracting a negative always becomes a positive, as I just showed earlier. So, for example, we have 7 minus -3 means 7 plus 3, which is 10. We have 6 minus -2. So this now becomes 6 plus 2, which is 8. And here we have -1 minus -5 becomes -1 plus 5. So the two negatives change to a plus. And as you can see here, we've got 5 positives and 1 negative. The result must be positive. Take the difference between the 5 and the 1, we get 4.